Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Dr. Tim Smith, Associate Provost of the College. It's my great pleasure to welcome you this morning to our Provost Forum featuring Dr. Rector. Yes, ooh and ah is appropriate. We are looking forward to this talk today. First, though, the usual public service announcements. Please silence or turn off your phones. And particularly for those who are seated back at the back in this area, we are, of course, as usual, recording Dr. Rector's words for posterity on video, so it picks up everything you say. We really do ask you to refrain from speaking, talking, particularly back in that area. Plus, you're going to want to hear exactly what he's saying anyway. He'll be hanging on every word without a doubt. Yes. Now, a little bit more about today's speaker. Dr. Rector joined the BSc faculty in 2009 and currently serves as an associate professor of psychology at the college. He received a BA from the University of Virginia and an MA and PhD from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. His research interests include cognition development in infants and toddlers and behavioral issues in children and emerging adults. So that should cover everybody in the room, I think, right? Yes. His presentation today is entitled, "Inclusion is not choice, but a requirement." Please help me welcome to the stage Dr. Richard Rector.
All right, so anybody that's ever had a class with me knows that I like to move around while I'm in the classroom. So I may have an awkward, I've never spoken into the microphone. This will be new for me. So first of all, I very much appreciate everyone here. There's a lot of people, a lot of familiar faces. And I also like to tip my hat to the baseball team because they've come out in droves for me today. So thank you so much, guys. So we're supposed to be talking about what I did on a sabbatical. So I'll be going through some of the things, the ins and outs, and the things that I've learned along the way. And really, the very first thing I learned is sabbaticals are awesome. I cannot say how good a sabbatical is enough. So that was excellent. And so we'll be going through, where did I go? What did I do? And I'll have to describe to you one of the groups that I did the most work with in the Regional Autism Network and why I think it's extremely important and it's something that is very useful for our state. And then, of course, I've got to do just a little overview of autism spectrum disorder and just so that everybody's on the same page, because while inclusion can mean any group that is marginalized or put on the back burner or hidden away from society, this group, or the focus today, is going to be primarily on autism. And keep in mind that a lot of the practices and the training stuff that we're going to discuss today can be adapted to fit many different groups. And so this is, while it's autism focused, it's really going to be any group with special needs could benefit from a lot of the stuff that we're going to discuss today. Of course, obviously, with the title inclusion, we're going to have to give you a brief overview of what inclusion is. And then kind of the surprise of my sabbatical, and Gina, I'm glad she's here, is I've been working for the last year quite a bit with the Alabama public library system. And just as a matter of fact, on Friday morning, I spent 2 or 3 hours at the Tuscaloosa Public Library and was doing a training with them. And we'll discuss a little bit of what that entails and then hopefully what I'll do with this in the future. So where did I go? And I've got to give you a quick little background on what this is, what you're seeing here. And quite honestly, this is the Autism Network. Regional Autism Network was, and I'm just going to step away there. So the Regional Autism Network was it came about, honestly, because the state of Alabama got a black eye education and insurance-wise. I know that shocks everyone in here if you know anything about the way our state works, but 4 or 5 years ago, it came out that our state was one of 5 states that did not require that insurance pay for any sort of therapy for a child with autism. No OT, no PT, no speech, nothing. Nothing that we thought could benefit this child developmentally was going to be covered by insurance. And the state waffled and said, well, yes, we do. We have that on the books. And actually, what they had passed
in, I think, around 2011. What they had passed was kind of an insurance rider idea, meaning if any public or private company that offers insurance wanted to pick up the autism rider, which is extra for the company to have to pay for, they can pick up the autism rider for insurance. And does anybody want to guess by 2016 how many in that 5-year span in our state picked up that rider? 0. Not a single company in the state chose, not even Children's Hospital, which is supposed to be in the business of taking care of children. And I'm a little bitter about that because my wife works at Children's Hospital, so it's shocking to me that they didn't do that. No one chose to pay for this. So now if you had a kid with ADHD, you could get some of the therapy given if you or paid for. If you had a kid with a language processing issue, if you had a kid with a developmental delay, insurance would help. If you had a child with autism, you were just out of luck. And so, of course, what did our state do? I'm sure you're thinking, well, of course our state immediately fixed the problem. Of course they did. They did a knee-jerk reaction, which we jumped on, and the knee-jerk reaction was creating the regional autism network. They said, all right, we're getting a black eye, we've got to do something. We don't really want to do this insurance thing because that costs money. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a program, and it's going to be housed at 5 different public universities, and each of these programs are going to be the hub of autism information for different regions of the state. There are 67 counties, 67 counties, and each of those counties will fall under one of these 5 regions. So you're looking at, I think the smallest region as far as number of counties is 11, so between 11 and 18 or so for each region. And if you have a question about autism, whether it be, I need an assessment for my child, I'm worried that they may have autism, or later on, I need an IP plan, or I need help with transitioning into adulthood, or I have an aging person on the spectrum that needs a place to stay now. So where do they live now that I'm too old to take care of them? You're supposed to call one of these places, and they, even though they may not have the answer immediately, they're supposed to be able to get you in touch with services for your county. This is important because of those 67 counties, 61 of them are considered medically underserved. Not enough nurses, not enough doctors, not enough hospitals. 9 of the counties don't even have a hospital. So if you break your leg in one of those counties, you've got to drive to a completely different county just to go to a hospital. We are extremely below the national average when it comes to serving people medically. And this was a hope of at least trying to, what is out there, this group will try to get you in touch with what's out there. So how did I get involved with them? It's just one of the things in the legislation, because it is a state-sponsored group. In the legislation, they made it into where there was a committee that had to act as an advisory role, to these 5 sites. Each site has their own committee. And it's supposed to be made up of self-advocates, people who actually have autism and will be on the committee, are high-functioning enough to be a part. And then families of people, or people who have a family member with a diagnosis. It has to be an immediate family member, someone that you work closely with. And so if you don't know, I have a son with autism. Now, I know life's little ironies. I spent 4 years in the group home system, 10 years at a disability center, studying and working and doing assessments, and then suddenly I have a child who needs all of those things. And so I became a part of the committee, and that's how I got to know it, and then it was a natural progression because, going back to one of the problems, they are tasked to do these 4 things. Now they're tasked to do other things, but these are really kind of at the core of what they're supposed to be doing. And this is a lot, especially if you're supposed to be doing this for 16 different counties. This is a lot of work. So does anybody want to guess how many people at each of these sites do they partially employ to meet the needs of 16 to 18 counties? 2. 2 people at each site. Now, and they are funded with $75,000 a year. Now, for this $75,000, half of the money, half of the salary of the director is taken out of the $75,000. So whatever their salary was set at when they got the job, they get half of that from the 75,000. Of the 5 sites, the person with the smallest chunk was a social worker who just happened to be working at UAB Brand. She's a social worker making approximately 48 to 50,000, so that's 25,000 right out of the 75,000 to begin with. And then they had to pay an assistant director, usually a grad student. And of course, they have to get their 18,000, 20,000, and so that's for them to live on for the whole year. So suddenly we're down to $35,000, and we're supposed to be doing all of this. Now the regional, the UAB one that I worked with closely does an exceptional job addressing these bottom 2. The programs, the teaching programs, they just had one on Monday, and they brought in a lawyer who was doing it pro bono, came in and talked to families about how to set up a living will, how to set up guardianship, and all that kind of stuff. And they do a 3-hour training where they break off into small groups and do it's more of a workshop, and it's excellent, and it's free to anyone that wants to come, and it does everything from planning issues one month to living wills the next month to whatever they need. Families, providers can all come. They do a great job. But then to ask these 2 people to also do this, where they're supposed to go into the direct assistance in the home or the community, it's just too much. So when I got there, the first thing we jumped in, I got in there in January. This was not what I thought we were going to be doing, but boy, I walked in the door and someone said, hey, there's this new grant that we're going to apply for. And it's got to be turned in in, I think, March or April. So we've just got a couple month window. We've got to get on this right now. And they said, you're an academic. You're going to help us write this grant, which is all well and good, except I have very little experience writing a grant. But we all pitched in. Spent a lot of time writing this. It's a HRSA grant. It's a government agency, Health Resources Services Administration. And this HRSA grant is going to give us $2.5 million. Now that's over a 4-year span, but that was going to allow each of these sites to hire someone full-time to be the coordinator, to go to each of these, to actually be able to physically go to the county. So the UAB counties stretch all the way to the Georgia line. If you just go straight I-20, all of those counties you go through is the UAB region. Well, that's a long way to go. And this $2.5 million is going to be fantastic. It's going to open up so many opportunities. And we got a great score and great feedback, and we did not get we didn't get it. So now we're still going to have to try to figure out how to do this. And of course, while I'm there, one of the things they made me do, and I say made it because I wasn't real, I didn't want to be doing this, but I had to go down to Montgomery because this is a state-run organization. And every quarter they have to go down. It's a division of the Department of Mental Health, and they have to go before a committee and basically explain why we're important and why we should continue to receive that $75,000 that you're giving us. And basically give them a feedback of what we're doing. So I got to go down there and do this. Of course, we just turned this in. We didn't know we were getting it. We turned it in. We were very excited. And I get up to talk. Again, here's my cynicism. Didn't realize that no one there on that board cared what I was saying. I mean, they paid it lip service, but it was obvious. And so I realized, the second thing I learned on my sabbatical, I hate politicians. Now, in fairness, I didn't learn that. It was more like a qualitative, I got a lot of detail to support my original hypothesis. But as we were there, I was starting to think, what can I do if this thing doesn't go through? I mean, why is it? And I try to explain to them why this is so important. And it was clear they didn't understand what autism was. And I appreciate it because there are a lot of misinformation out there. If you watch certain movies, Rain Man and that kind of stuff, it will mislead you into believing what you think autism is. So very quickly, I want you to autism is neurological. It's a neurobiological issue. Now, we have yet to figure out what it is, although I don't see her here. I do have an advisee who's working with Dr. Chandler and myself, and she is doing really good, graduate level research work, or review work. in looking at gray matter and white matter in specific areas of the brain that could be causing some of the symptoms, but this is not the time to get into that because I could go on and on. But this is a lifelong, we see it early on, and the reason it's important is it's the fastest growing developmental disability in the U.S. The CDC came out in 2018 and said 1 out of 59 children will be diagnosed with autism. Now, that is a really high number, especially considering in 2014 the CDC said 1 in 68, in 2000 the CDC said 1 in 150, and I show a clip for Oliver Sacks, and I don't know if you all know who Oliver Sacks is. I think Oliver Sacks is one of the great minds of the 20th century. In '96, he shot a series of documentaries, one of which was on autism. And I showed the opening clip to my class often because in it, he starts with autism, a relatively rare disorder. And this was '96, and now it's 1 in 59. And this is a real concern and something that finally most governments are recognizing that this needs to be addressed. And so autism is the great equalizer. This is another thing that really helps because unlike conduct disorder, unlike ADHD and learning disorders, which often we see are in the low socioeconomic groups and clearly harms poor school systems. We see higher rates of those kind of things in bad school systems and just less affluent areas. Autism is a great equalizer. There is no difference in socioeconomic status, race, ethnic group. The only place where it differentiates itself is by gender. Boys are by far more likely to be diagnosed with autism. But we also see that with other neurological issues. We know ADHD, we believe, is clearly neurobiologically based. Boys are far more likely to be ADHD. There's something about boys that put them at risk for these early developmental disabilities, more so than women, and we haven't quite figured out why. We can detect it as early as 24 months, although that's reliably detected. We can reliably detect it. We can actually diagnose it as early as 12 months, but reliably about 24 months. But, again, getting preachy here, our state, want to guess what is the average year of diagnosis? It's not 2, it's 4 years old. We're not catching this until several years later. And if you've been in my 101, I know that I saw a couple of people in here from my 101 class, we just talked about it, neuroplasticity. Yay, there's one. Neuroplasticity. And that area, there's a window of opportunity that we can help some of these behaviors. If we get the right intervention between 0 and 6, we can truly make a difference. And we're not catching it early. We're catching it at 4, 4.5. And part of that's because of the medically underserved. The waiting list currently, and Birmingham is one of those counties that is not medically, or one of those areas is not medically underserved. It's one of the few counties that we're good as far as that goes. But the waiting list, and Christian, I'm going to point him out. Christian Klesse is a former graduate here. He is the current acting director of the UAB RAN, and he's about to finish up his doctorate this summer in developmental psychology. So as far as this, what is the wait list currently that you know of, that you're involved for an assessment? Yes.
2 years.
It's 2-year wait list. So even when you have a concern at 2, that kid's not being seen by a doctor until they're 4. I mean, we are missing a huge opportunity here. So that's the kind of things that I was talking to the politicians who didn't really want to listen to what I had to say. And the other, this one's a biggie, it's chronic and it's lifelong. This doesn't change. It doesn't go away. Autism can't be cured. Doesn't matter what Judy McCarthy said. Autism doesn't go away. There's no cure. Jim Carrey is not the autism whisperer. Autism isn't caused by vaccines. Taking your clothes off for Playboy is not a personality trait. I just threw that last one in. If you know who Jimmy McCarthy is, you'll understand that reference. This is important. This is something that needs to be addressed. And it can't be hidden under the rug, and we can't not help them financially. They're only scientifically not validated, because even that one, even ABA, it's a little sketchy, but at least some evidence that says there's a type of therapy that seems to be really beneficial for this group. It's called applied behavior analysis, and Auburn has a program in it. We actually have a graduate from here who got his doctorate specializing in ABA therapy, Michael Falligan, and his dad is who works with Piper Place that some of you all have had experiences with. So we have the capabilities of teaching this, but insurance won't pay for it. And so if you were to give your child 8 hours a week of ABA therapy, and they suggest at least 20 hours to be truly beneficial. If you give them 8 hours a week for an entire year, it's going to cost you out of pocket $18,000. How many of you all, or your families, do you think could come up with $18,000? And it's not just 1 year. Typically, it's over a 3 or 4 year span that you're racking up $18,000 a year for this therapy. It doesn't go away, so by not addressing it isn't going to make it better. It's just going to make long-term outcomes worse for this population. And this leads to the title and why it's really important that we help this group, because inclusion just means they need to be a part. They need to be valued in their community. They need to be able to take part in recreational activities. They need to be seen and not hidden away. They need to be able to go to classes with typically developing peers. And all of this this is the basic definition of inclusion, and it all sounds great. And logically, you say, well, of course they need this. But, I'm looking see Shane here, Dr. Pitts, because we had a discussion about this. While it sounds logical, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true, or it's beneficial, or it helps the child. By sticking them with typically developing peers, just saying that sounds okay doesn't mean it actually does work. So we looked at the research, and one of the best ones came out 2012 out of Massachusetts. They looked at 68,000 children. Now, not all with autism. These were just a wide variety of known diagnosed children with certain disabilities. And what we found clearly was, and it's by far, the ones that are with their typically developing peers more often during the day are the ones that score better on math, science, and people are like, of course, immediately, what could be the problem with this? There's clearly one variable that could really be throwing this off. That the ones that are getting to be with the typically developing peers more during the day are doing better. What could be doing skewing that? Could be the severity of the disability. I mean, clearly, if you have a more disabled or severely disabled child, maybe they can't be in the classroom. But see, they actually knew that, so they held that consistent. They held English proficiency. They controlled for that. They controlled for all these different variables, and they still found being around typically developing peers is a good thing for people with special needs. But is it a good thing for the kids that don't have special needs? If I'm going to make this argument, I don't want to, harm one group to help another. So is it going to harm this group? A very good study looking at a variety of methodologies in wildly different areas of the country found that no. Now, it may not help. Not every study found that it helped people without special needs, but it didn't harm them in any way. Their scores didn't go down. It didn't seem to take away from their education whatsoever. And in 28% of them, there were actually improvements in their education on their score. But there was no harm that came from being in the same class with someone with a disability. But then there's still the question, if you're a teacher and you have multiple kids in your class with severe emotional disabilities or educational disabilities, am I going to be an effective teacher to the other kids? Or I'm going to have to spend all my time working with this group? And that's a real concern, and one that should be considered. And what we found is the way to offset that, the way to mitigate this, is by offering more training and more experience in working with disabilities. The teachers that had that training seemed to do exceptionally well no matter who you threw in there. The teachers who didn't have the training didn't. So really, the core takeaway is training and experience is what's going to make both the non-peers or the peers with no disabilities versus the peers that do turn out okay at the the importance is the training. And this is where it got a little unusual. This is where I didn't expect to be going. But while we're doing because I knew we were going to be sending the databases and we're going to do all this kind of stuff with the money that's just going to be flowing in from the government. And then we get a call from Hoover Library, because they called the RAIN network. And they said, we're struggling, man. We don't know who to talk to, but we have an adult client that comes in fairly regularly, and he has autism. We know that because we've talked to his parents. And what the parents do is they pull in, and he gets so excited. While they're parking, he can't wait. He jumps out of the car and he runs into the thing. Now, again, this is an adult. This is a 22, 23-year-old man who's running like a little kid into the library because cognitively he's at a 4 or 5-year-old level. And where does a 4 or 5-year-old go? They don't go to the quiet nonfiction section. They run over where all the other kids are. And so families of a 3-year-old girl, and there's one specifically they mentioned that she's wearing a SpongeBob t-shirt, and he loves SpongeBob, and so he runs over to her to try to talk to her about SpongeBob, and he's acting erratically or unusually, and he's big, and now he's talking to a 3-year-old without talking to the parents first, and this freaked the parents out. This is an issue. And it is an issue, and it's one that, and they want to know, how can we handle this that helps and benefits the client, but also takes into consideration the needs of the other people that are coming in. And so we talked about some things, and then they said, you know what, instead of you just telling us, maybe you need to do a whole training and do some best practices for our library. Like, oh, well, of course, what do? I have to go and see, has someone already done this? And so I looked, and people have said, not only have they kind of set up, and there are a few states. Florida has been fantastic at setting up these training opportunities. The state of Florida has an excellent program called PALS. Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Oregon have good training programs. That's about it. But they came up, especially in Pennsylvania, it was a conference in New York, but Pennsylvania is the one that actually took away, in 2013, in a conference in Syracuse, librarians got together and talked about some of the things that it was a national conference, talked about some of the things that were going on. One of the things they were saying is, we're dealing with these unusual behaviors from autism, and we don't know why. And we don't know what to do, we don't know how to work with them. And the reason, and this is from some of these discussions, the reason libraries are having to deal with this more so than other public sectors, one, they're quiet. By its very nature, autism has a hard time with sudden noises and anything that comes out of the norm. And so temperature changes, weird lighting, all of that kind of stuff can overwhelm a person with sensory issues. And the library is a controlled environment. It's quiet, it's calm, it's stable, and it's predictable. It's something that they know what they're getting into no matter what library they walk into. The layout's going to be similar. The dynamics, the rules and regulations are always the same. Every library they go to, it's consistent, it's routine, and it's something that they can find predictable, and also that calms their anxiety. Now, there's also this, the core deficit of autism. And there are several deficits, but the one that separates autism from all other disabilities is social situations. People with autism have a difficult time in social situations, even the high-functioning ones, and social communication issues is the key deficit, truly. But that doesn't mean they don't want to be social. They just have a difficult time with it. They want to be a part, and the library is a place where they can go and they can have a controlled social situation. When they go, they know what they're going to do. They're going to walk up to the help desk, and the help desk is going to say, hey, can I help you? And they can practice this. And then they can say, okay, I know when they say that, I'm going to say, yes, I would like a book on the Titanic. And then that person is going to say, well, let me show you where that book is. And they can practice those and feel comfortable, and it's predictable, and they can be social without having to be too social and get overwhelmed, sort of. And then finally, another quirk of autism, and it's really one of the diagnostic criteria, is called restricted interest and or behaviors. And children, especially people who are high functioning yet, they focus on these areas of interest. They take intense interest in one or two topics, and then they know everything there is to know about those topics. And where is the place to go and increase your knowledge? the library. And so they can go and they seek out that information, and then of course, I see Gina shaking her head, and then they want to share it with somebody. They want to talk to somebody. We're going to discuss the appropriate ways to handle that. But libraries are having to deal with this population far more than other groups in the public sector. It's just a safe haven for this group. Now, so they ask, what can we do? And so these, now keep in mind, these things are going to be library specific. As I said, though, they're adaptable to all situations. And I would like to point out, and I did get permission, but Mackenzie Kirkham's family does every summer they do come out, ride the tractor, and in the fall they can come get a pumpkin, and they do these but there's a specific time during the summer that they do come and run around the fields and all this kind of stuff. And then they asked me recently, could I help them create a quiet space, a sensory-friendly space for people that get overwhelmed with the tractor noises and the kids screaming as they run through the cornfields or whatever. I'm not doing it, sorry. But still, these are the kind of things that can translate from a library to a corn maze kind of thing. I mean, all of these principles are very adaptable. And the first thing I told them is you need a quiet area. Now, the obvious thing is a quiet room. That would be the best. So create your quiet room, that sort of thing. But if you don't have a quiet room, a quiet space works. Somewhere in the corner of the library where there's less people walking through, you can see a little nook like this. Actually, Mountain Brook Library, they accidentally created a space. This was before I had a training there also. Before it, someone was very artistic there, and they created these papier-mâché trees, and so it looked like you were walking through a forest, but it also toned down the lighting in the room, and it was in the corner, and they were finding that, now not every kid that went there had autism, but they were finding lots of kids were like hanging out in the dark little space. It made them feel safe and secure, like their little cubby. Again, libraries are under, just like everyone, they can't spend, and so they have to judiciously figure out how they're going to use their money, but this doesn't take up a lot of their things. Another one, I mentioned lighting, for whatever reason, fluorescent lighting can be difficult for lots of people, but for people on the spectrum, fluorescent lighting is just awful. They hate it. And so one of the things we suggested is that you can, at least one little corner, one area, you don't have, obviously we wouldn't make them do this for the entire library, but you can cover those the lighting up with just these simple sheets. And the sheets, you're looking at approximately $10, but Homewood Library, which is another library that I worked with, Homewood Library has a room separated from all the others, and they were going to do this, which they did, and they just went to some of the linen stores and told them, hey, this is what we're doing in the linen stores. Like, look, we got all this stuff in the back that's spare, and they just gave them the stuff. So it's free of charge. It's one little room that has these weird lighting covers sort of things, and it's extremely beneficial and easy. And by the way, Homewood Library, just as an aside, it was a bad mouth. Homewood Library also worked with me. They wanted a grant for their summer reading program. They wanted to make their summer reading program more sensory friendly. I mean, they've really been at the forefront here recently. And so what they do is they bring in, I don't know if you all had this experience, but my daughter was 15. We used to go to every summer program. We would go in and they'd have a magician. They would have Roger Day is kind of a local celebrity around here, and he comes and sings Mosquito Burrito, and it's a no-no to kiss a rhino, and the kids love him. It's loud and it's boisterous and all that kind of stuff. And what they're going to do, or what she wanted to do, was she wanted to pay Roger Day to do a sensory-friendly, literally an acoustic version of his show, a quieter version of his show, so that kids that get overwhelmed easily could come and see that. But to do that, you have to pay them. So we wrote a grant, now again, a $3,000 grant versus a $2.5 million grant. So a whole lot less work, and they got it, and they're going to institute it this summer, and they're very excited, and I'm excited to see it. So, lesson number 3, aim low. I thought you thought I was going to be motivational here. Clearly, I was punching out of my weight range in the first one, but we did get that one. Other things, stimulating accessories. Now, obviously, this is extremely expensive. We wouldn't ask every library to put in nice wooden rocking chairs, but now there's lots of things like this. These are pipe cleaners, and what you'll see is they'll just, all of us fidget. Every one of you all may tap your toe or bite the pencil kind of thing. We all fidget a little bit, but children with autism fidget all the time. They're constantly needing that kind of self-stimulatory stuff. And this, or bubble wrap, or paper towel roll holders where they can kind of spin it in their hands. I mean, these are not things that are expensive at all that you can use that they would find extremely beneficial. This one right here, if you get the cheap ones, Oriental Express, don't know if anybody knows what that is. I'll share a little too much knowledge. For my son's 3rd birthday, we did a blowout. No, excuse me, my daughter's 3rd birthday, we did a blowout. And we bought so much of this junk from Oriental Express that I actually got a call from the regional manager asking me if I was starting up a store and if he could be of help to set that up. But what I'm saying is this is cheap. This is you can get a whole box of these spinners for like $10. And it doesn't break the bank. And now, I show the headphones. Most kids who need headphones or adults who need headphones, they're going to bring them out. So libraries can have those on hand, but they don't have to. And they are expensive. I think the cheapest you could find is $20, $25. But you don't have to do that. The other thing, libraries do this very well. The one that I point that all of us could do better is identify ourselves. If we, again, social anxiety, they know they have problems with social issues, and now they're talking to someone, they don't know their name, and they struggle with that. Having a way to say, oh, that's Jill. Okay, so I know I'm talking to Jill, that calms them down a little bit. So having the name tags can be very important with this group. Also, the library thing that I just did in Tuscaloosa, of course, after I did our training, they came up and started telling me about people that they were working with or having difficulties with. And the most difficult one was a teenager, and she would wear her AirPods, and she said we could literally see when she walked in, she would turn them up really loud, so then she wouldn't have to engage anybody, but she's got to take her books. Now, the Tuscaloosa Library does not have a separate place to drop your books off. You have to go up to the help desk to turn in your books, and so she hates that. So what she ends up doing is she just throws the bag upon, and the books fly off every which direction, causing a scene. What can we do about this? And I said, well, the easiest thing to do is find a place where she can just turn these books in where she doesn't have to see the person, doesn't have to engage. Now, if that's not possible and it continues, obviously, then you have to talk to the parent. But all of this kind of stuff, setting, and then there's the communication. I'm still trying to see where I'm at. I'm not getting this too far behind. There's the communication. Nonverbal, about a third of kids with autism are going to be nonverbal for the rest of their life. And so you just got to find a way to communicate with them. Some will use sign language, but it's not true sign language. They're not signing full sentences and that sort of thing. They're just not. It's usually some very basic, more, thank you, please. That very simple, 4 or 5, and that's probably all they need to know or all they want that they're able to use. iPads become the biggest thing. They use a picture exchange system. They come in, they'll point to it, and they'll say, book, which clearly, I'm here for a book, sort of thing. And then they can communicate that way. Whatever it is, work with their communication method. And so then we'd also discuss, what if they do talk? As I just said, 30% don't. This is where it gets unusual, and sometimes I find it fascinating. How do we talk to them? This is where we go wrong. People with ASD are very literal. They're very concrete thinkers. They can't do metaphors. They can't do sayings and cliches. And you should avoid them at all possible when talking to this group. So if it's raining outside, you don't go, ooh, it's raining cats and dogs out there. Now, the person may have heard that saying, and they've been explained. They know what that saying is. Even if they understand what you mean by that saying, they now may have gone into their autism world. They're imagining cats and dogs falling from the sky, and a poodle is a puddle, or a puddle's a poodle, ha ha ha, and then you've lost them for the next 5 minutes. Don't do that to them. They're going to fall power.
So don't do that to them if you can help it. And straightforward, to the point, be as literal as possible as you, when you want to say something about the rain, just say, it's really raining hard outside. And that's it. It's just straightforward. And then don't do multi-step directions. Think of talking to them as if you're talking to a 4 or 5-year-old. If you sent your 4-year-old upstairs with the parents in here and you say, get your shoes, your socks, your jacket, and your bag, and come back downstairs. Now, what's going to happen is they're going to remember the first thing, the shoes probably. They're probably going to remember the last thing you said, the jacket. That stuff in the middle, it's hit or miss if it's ever going to make it downstairs. Don't do that to them. They also have a hard time because they have processing. They may be a little slower to process what you're saying, which then makes it harder for them to remember the things that you say. Keep it simple, keep it straightforward. And then if you're going to give them literal directions, like where's the bathroom or where's the science fiction section, one thing you can do is laminate a map of your area, a map of, and just say, here you go, this is us, and you can find your way around. That would just make some of my friends with autism absolute day to have a map. And then wait a little longer. Again, I mentioned the processing issue. Processing is a problem for them. And so when you ask them a question, pause longer than you're typically, and also pause longer than you feel, should start to feel awkward for you in the pause because it takes them longer. And they often will respond if given enough time. Now we're getting into the final communication issues. Echolalia. We often see them repeat what they've heard. And when you're talking to them, and immediate echolalia, we used to just think is jabbering. So you would say something like, did you like the book? And they'll just go, like the book, like the book, like the book, like the book, and just say it over and over and over, and it just seems like gibberish. But what we found is sometimes it's their outward way of processing. If you teach a child to read, when you teach a child to read, the first time they read, they're reading, of course, out loud. And then, of course, the reading Nazi comes along in 2nd or 3rd grade and says, you've got to read to yourself. So what do kids do when they first try to read to themselves? They whisper. And then the teacher still gets on it. Like, no, you read to yourself. And so then they mouth the words. And then eventually, they get the inner monologue, that inner voice that they can hear in their heads. And some of our people on the spectrum never really develop the inner voice. And it's their way of processing it on the outside world. Another thing that they might do is they might actually be saying yes or no. So if you say, did you like the book? You may get this, like the book. Okay, well, they like the book, or like the book, like the book. And they'll do that, okay, you didn't like the book, sort of thing. Or it could simply be a form of rehearsal, such as you send someone in, say, we need milk, bread, and eggs. And so as they get out of the car, milk, bread, eggs. And it could be that. But my favorite form of echolate, the one that's most interesting, I know that's an interesting combination I just threw up with, but there's a point to it, I promise. There's what we call scripting, and it is common with people with autism that they use scripts from favorite movies or music or TV shows that they've seen as a way of trying to communicate. And it can be one of two things typically. One is it's stressful. And if they're stressed out, you often see the scripting start. And one of the very first kids I ever had to do an assessment with was the early 2000s, and she was 8 or 9 years old, and she'd already been diagnosed with autism, but we were doing some other testing with her. She came in, she was carrying a plush cat, a stuffed animal, but it was a cat, it was a white cat, and she was carrying it like this, like a lawn villain. And she just kept stroking. Now, the more stressed out she became, the harder she would stroke the cat, sort of thing. And also, she would start saying, I don't know why, Mary Poppins. Now, she'd just say it, and she'd say it in this weird, crackly, Mary Poppins. And the closer I would get to her, the more I'd stress her out, and the more she would say it a little louder. And then I got too close, and then she just casually reached over and just pinches the life out of me, to let me know I'd invaded her space. My fault, I had to step back. So sometimes you see that, but the far more entertaining is when they're trying to use these scripts they've seen in TV or movies to communicate. And for those of you all who are too young to know what this is A Few Good Men, and it's one of the most famous movie lines in the history of cinema. and he's being cross-examined by Tom Cruise, and Jack here yells, "You can't handle the truth," in this scene right here. And that became very famous. In 1996, I was working in a group home, and it's specifically for people with autism. And I know, life's a little ironies, but specifically for people with autism. And one of the kids did this scripted stuff. That was his way of communicating. And he would let me know when I had crossed a line and really irritated him by slamming his hand really hard. "You can't handle the truth." And I'm like, "Oh, I've messed up. I don't know. I'm not sure what's happened, but clearly I need to figure this out." And that was a way. And if you know those movies and you can talk in their script, this is one of those, it's not like a delusion that you're somehow harming them by playing into. This is their form of communication. Jump right in. If you know all the lines to Titanic, that's what they want to, you just go right ahead. And then, of course, getting back to them wanting to tell you, I'm trying to speed this up a little bit, what we tell the librarians, and this is for anyone working with this population, if they do want to talk to you about their stuff and you can't get away from it, and you can't, they will not read any social cues. That's not what they do. They will just keep talking. You do the, "Okay, well, look, I'm all interested in what you have to say, but you can tell me 2 things about the Titanic, and then I'm going to show you how to do this book. So you do 2, and then I do something," kind of thing. And then sort of thing. So you set the boundaries because they're not capable of setting their own boundaries. That's one of their issues. They don't set their social boundaries well. But of course, the library, the ones that people keep coming to me for, are challenging behaviors. How do I deal with these challenging behaviors? And as librarians, the first thing I tell them is, you're not supposed to be handling them. That is not your job. Now, we can prevent it, and if you can jump in and prevent it, because there's 3 stages to a tantrum. Meltdown, tantrum, same thing. There's 3 stages. There's what we call the rumbling, the rage, and the recovery stage. And if you can catch it in the rumbling stage and distract, reintroduce something else, then you've got a chance. Once it hits the rage stage, you can't handle it. They're gone. They've lost it. The meltdown has occurred. There's nothing you as the person working there can do. So what we try to do is, what is it that's causing it? Is it the lights? Is it the sound? Can we redirect them into something that they like? Can we get them to the quiet place that we've set up? But most importantly, stay calm. They will read your language and the way you respond, and they will not always act appropriately, but at least it helps with the situation. So we talk. There's no perfect way of doing it, and this is not a population. Now, fortunately, adults typically don't melt down. This is usually a child, early adolescent issue and not an adult issue, so that's rare. But it could happen. So, after all this, what's next? Well, again, after talking with Christian, and he is currently, for his dissertation, he's evaluating the effectiveness of the trainings that the RAN is doing, the Regional Autism Network is doing, and doing what we thought at the time was a fidelity measure. Now we're going to have to rename it, but he's doing his research on, is this working? Is this training beneficial? Because again, it sounds great, but is it working? And so we're going to adopt or adapt what he's doing to try to evaluate mine. In the same way, we're going to do a pre-post questionnaire at the beginning, and then, again, I was looking for Shane because I talked with Dr. Pitts, and he suggested, and then doing maybe a 3-month follow-up and seeing if any of the things that have been implemented, do they still feel like the information has been helpful? This is all qualitative, but we're trying to quantify it somewhat and see, am I doing something that's effective, or am I just wasting my time? Is it working or is it not working? And we're going to recruit through the RAN, but we're also going to recruit, they had me come and talk at the Alabama Library Conference last year. I gave a talk on best practices. And they've asked me to come back again this year and make it a little more focused. And we're going to talk about hiring and how to interview and hire and work with people, because they're looking to actually hire people with special needs at their libraries, and they're like trainings on that. But I'm going to use that as an opportunity to say, hey, if you would like free training, I'm not charging for this. I would love to come to your library and give. And every quarterly, all of our public libraries do a continuing ed sort of thing every quarter. forward. So it would fit right into their system and then hopefully continue this on. And so I want to end here with showing my little guy. And so obviously it's a professional issue, but it's a very personal issue. And Ross and I mentioned in inclusion about being a part of the community, doing recreational activities, and I'm glad the baseball team was here because on Saturday, Ross and I, it was a beautiful day, we came to watch, and it was our first home, it was their third home game. It was the first one that Ross and I got to come to. And we have to set up on a patio that's right outside the swimming area, if you know where that is, because it's huge. It's also got a gate that he hasn't figured out that he could just open. He's not quite processed that one yet. And he can run around, he does his thing, he stems and he vocalizes. And if he does that in the stands, it's loud and it's distracting, and he sometimes knocks people's hats off, and he can be a distraction, I understand that. But this allows me to watch the game, and allows him to have a good time, and we can be out in public and just be a part of the community. And all of this is about this, all of this discussion, inclusion and training and experience and those sorts of situations. That's at the heart of this, is being a part of the community. And I'll leave you with this quote from Maya Angelou, where she said, "People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel that day." And what we're trying to do here, we're trying to make people feel, people who are often marginalized, who are ridiculed, sometimes just hidden away completely, we make them feel less than. And we want to try to make them feel valued, to be a contributing member of the community. And these sorts of trainings and this kind of stuff is the step in the right direction. And so I'm going to continue to do this, and I hope some of you all will follow it. Some of the students will kind of follow in this direction. It doesn't have to be autism specific. There are just so many. I had a student who just did an internship in Jan term for the RAM program. I have another student that did an internship at Mitchell's Place. I have another student do an internship at Piper Place. There's lots of areas of need, and this is a useful and helpful, and I hope it will continue on. So for Ross and other families in my state that have similar situations, I want to tell you how much I appreciate that you took time out of your day to come listen to me, and thank you. Thank you so much. Ask if there are any questions or comments.
So obviously we're here on the college campus. Some college campuses do have resources while on campus. Speaking to students in the room who may have classmates who are on the spectrum and may not have, that is their choice whether or not to disclose, and or faculty and staff. What are some things at the college level that you think are important considerations?
Sure, and if we had lots of funding, I could really go, because for instance, Mississippi State has a wonderful program, and where they bring in students with special needs, and they get to take one regular class with accommodations, and then they get to take some other classes that are kind of home ec, life skills classes, and then they assign for credit, they assign a person who does, they're usually collaborative education majors or education majors, and they assign one to be their tutor and work with them 4 to 5 hours a week. They assign another one to be they call it their social, they're supposed to go to games with them and involve them, and then they have another one that does a physical aspect, like make sure that they don't just sit in their room and eat Cheetos the whole time. And it's a wonderful program, and there's a person that I know that she's come and she's talked to she's a self-advocate, and she's talked to my class on multiple occasions. If you look up the YouTube, she does an Awesome Mary. Awesome Mary she was on the Ellen Show and all that, and she's currently at Mississippi State. So in those kind of programs, fabulous. Now at our level, obviously we can't do that. Now one of our students here has created it's called Unique and Included. Unique and Included, and it's a group that's supposed to be furthering the idea of visible difficulties and invisible difficulties and disabilities, and how can we better address those. And so she's written a charter and all that, and worked with me on getting that going, and just awareness. I mean, a lot of on our campus now, it's small enough. That's the nice thing about a small campus is, if you see someone acting weird, you're going to see them acting weird a lot. I mean, you're going to see them again, 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 again. And so that becomes the norm. It's not so unusual to you. On larger campuses, you may see one person and never see them again for another 6 months. And so there's some acceptance already built into a smaller campus, but we could do something like the collaborative ed. I mean, that really wouldn't take that much, where we could, if a person wanted to sign up for that. I mean, again, and where they could be their tutor, or they could be there and work with, or their social coordinator. I love that one. This is the social coordinator. Let's go to the baseball game. No, you can't sit in your room and play video games all day, or whatever it is. We're going to go out and just be a part. And it's an exception, but it's hard without finances. It's hard to do.
Do we know why the incidence of autism has raised so much?
It's a great question, and we don't have great answers. The obvious answer, and there is one that at least helps us determine a good chunk of it, which is we're just getting better at recognizing it. In the past, people who were severely autistic or pervasive autism, we just called them mentally handicapped. And of course, that's not the term anymore. The term is intellectual disability. But in the past, the term was mental retardation. We just said they were severe to profound mental retardation. What we've seen is, as rates of autism have gone up, rates of intellectual disability have actually gone down some. So clearly, we're identifying them a little better, but that doesn't explain all of it. It does not help explain all of it. And we don't know what the cause is or what we can do. We do know it's not vaccines. I want to say that one more time on the record. It is not vaccines. But we don't know what the issue is. And we think it's developing in utero. We know that there's an issue with brain development, and we're looking at specific areas of the brain. But we don't know what's causing that development to happen that way. All right. Hey, thank you all so much.